welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. If this is your first time, welcome to the conversation. Glad to have you here. I'm excited to have you with us as we go through life stories. And for those returning users, thank you. And the reason why I say thank you is that we just recently learned in the last week that this show has now cracked into the top 10% of the fastest growing podcasts. And that's all because of you and all because of great guests. Well, that's pretty exciting news when you consider that there are over 1 million podcasts in the iTunes store. All right, a little bit of house cleaning. Please remember to subscribe. Whatever platform you're on, we're on 23 different pod distribution applications and sites. We are also always found on the rexandrewsshow.com site. So wherever you're listening, tune in that way. Or if you're finding this on social media, the video versions are always posted on YouTube. All right. Well, all that housekeeping out of the way, we're having a great day today. The sun is out and we're all vertical, at least we hope we are. And I've got a great guest to introduce to you. Kind of a fascinating topic and angle on things. You know, I try to keep most of my shows a lot around human development and improving and professional development and those stuff. And so this one fits right down that lane. Pretty excited to have her on. And so from Victoria, Canada, one of the first I've had in that region of the world, Justine Cochrane. Justine, how are you this afternoon?
I'm well, Rex. Thanks so much for having me on today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, we always talk on the show here, life is about human stories. And our human stories are an accumulation of where we've been, where we've come along the road, or like I like to say, we're crossing that stream and we're hopping from rock to rock. And hopefully we don't fall in the water. Hopefully we don't have to take too many hops back, but we always try to get to the other side. So Justine, if you could, help us understand, up to this point, the hops you've been on. So tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up, the size of your family life, all those kinds of things, up to education. And then we'll start talking about the things you do today. So tell us a little bit about Justine.
Yeah, sounds good. So I grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And I had a very typical upbringing. I mean, I met my husband in preschool, so we've been together forever.
Now, wait a minute. Preschool?
Preschool.
So this is like what, 4 or 5 years old?
I think you start when you're 3 here. So I've known him for a minute.
Oh my goodness. Wow. All right, sorry for the interruption.
That's okay.
That's the earliest I've heard on all the interviews I've done. That's the earliest I've heard someone say, I met my husband when I was in preschool. So that's great.
So we didn't start dating till we were in high school, but we've been together for a really long time. We have 2 little girls. I've got 6 chickens, and I'm just really enjoying life on Vancouver Island.
Nice. So tell us about your family a little bit. Kind of a nuclear family, mom and dad. What did your parents do for a living as you were raised? Tell us a little bit about that, because our childhood adds quite a bit to our stories.
Absolutely. So I've got a very strong family structure, very much nuclear. My grandparents bought some property out here on the West Coast back in the 50s, and I live on it. My mom and dad live next door to us. My aunt and uncle live right down the driveway. So we're all close together here, grew up with lots of family around. Right. And that's definitely something that I want to continue going forward with my kids, just really keeping those family ties strong.
Well, I was going to say, if you have 6 chickens, you're probably not in the downtown of Vancouver. Yeah. So anyway, so how about siblings? Do you have any siblings then?
Yeah, I've got a brother who's a little bit younger than me, and he's got an amazing wife. So it's really nice, just like spending, in non-COVID times, those holidays and stuff together, and just, building memories, I think, for little kids, because I've got 2 and a 4-year-old right now. So building those memories as we're going forward.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so you started dating in high school. Then what happened?
Yeah, so we both went to university together. And I think that's sort of when my perfectionism and what I do with my work and where that all sort of started. So I did a psychology and linguistics degree at the University of Victoria. And then I started working for the University of British Columbia in the medical school there, and just sort of helping the doctor, physicians, and the students to connect with their learning materials. And my husband did his degree there as well. And we just sort of started our day-to-day life here in town. Moved to Vancouver to spend some time in the big city for a couple of years, but then resettled back here on the family property in Victoria.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice. Now, how many years did you work for the university?
10.
10 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
It
So,
was a fantastic place to work, really lovely people. And I mean, it's wonderful to be serving, helping to develop physicians, especially for like more rural areas, because we have a lot of those in British Columbia. So I have really fond memories of working for the University of British Columbia.
so what did you do in your role as your job there at the university?
Yeah, so I was the curriculum materials coordinator. So my job was to collect all the learning materials for the students in their first, second, and fourth years of their medical degree. So I reached out to the physician instructors, collected those materials, and then was in charge of the platform, the website that distributed them to the students. So if they were showing up to a class and they needed slides for like a lecture or a worksheet, I was the person who provided that for them.
So they skipped the third year for that type of need?
Third year is clerkship. So that's a good question. So they're out on rotation doing all the things doctors do.
Yeah.
They're in the classroom a little bit, but it's not the same as first, second, and fourth years.
The reason I ask is I've got a daughter that's currently in med school. So at Tufts in Boston. So I always ask because I don't know that much about med school. I know a whole lot about undergrad, but not a whole lot about med school.
You're going to find out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've already got one with a master's, and she might get a doctorate. She's in education and those and behavior sciences, but we're only on number 2 heading to advanced degrees so far. So anyway, okay. So you worked for the university for 10 years. Did you switch jobs or did you start working on what you're doing today?
After I left the university, you mean?
Yeah.
I actually had a couple of babies. So I had my first baby and I did my coaching certification during my maternity leave.
Okay.
And then I did go back to work after her. And then for my second baby, I had her a couple of years later. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to go back to work full time, have a coaching business on the side and raise 2 kids. So that's when I transitioned into my coaching business and left my 9-to-5 job, which was a scary thing to walk away from that, guaranteed income and the security and the benefits and the pension and all those things. So it was a big decision, but it was definitely the right one.
I know what that's like. When my kids were little, my wife was able to not have to work. And so it's a big difference when you have that opportunity to do that. So you're being blessed, and obviously your husband must be being blessed because you have the resources to do that. So congratulations. That's great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. So let's get into the meat of what you do, because, there are a lot of people out there doing all kinds of personal development coaching and life coaching and those types of things. I know you specialize in one thing pretty in particular. So let's unpack that a little bit. So tell me about exactly what you're doing, and then let's discuss the types of people that you help.
Absolutely. So I coach entrepreneurs and creatives to cut their stress in half by harnessing the power of their perfectionism. So I work with women who identify as perfectionists or people who have like those tendencies, and just sort of help them leverage the aspects of their personality that tend towards perfectionism so that they can meet their goals.
Okay. So when I always hear the word perfectionist, I've been in high tech for most of my career and a lot of business consulting. When I think of perfectionists, I always kind of think of the people who sometimes can't get out of their own way. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. And I mean, it takes one to know one, right? So I'm a recovering perfectionist myself, I would say. And I always joked that like my personality type was A plus, like not just an A type personality. We were an A type, A plus. And I think the literature sort of defines perfectionism as the imposition on oneself of like high goals that are unrealistic and even impossible to achieve, as well as having that tendency to harshly self-criticize when mistakes are made or when the proposed standards like aren't achieved. So I see a lot of procrastination in my clients, a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of self-criticism and like self-judgment. And just a lot of the time, they are stuck in one spot, unable to move forward because of all of those things.
Wow. So is it a situation where the person has an inaccurate understanding of self-awareness? Because there's a lot of people that are really smart, or they can't get past things because they don't realize that that they don't have to be perfect. I mean, what's the base root of this? I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah, so in my experience, the base root of it is that you don't feel like you're as valuable as a person as you could be if you achieved X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basing your self-worth on achieving those things instead of just having it be intrinsic and a part of who you are as a human. But within that, I do find that there's sort of three types of perfectionists. So there's like self-oriented. So those are people who require perfection of themselves, so holding themselves to really high standards.
Right.
But there's also the socially prescribed perfectionists. So those people have that perception that I think you're talking about that might not be realistic, but they feel like other people are judging them to an unrealistic standard. And they spend a lot of time and energy being worried that they're going to disappoint people
Okay.
based on their assumption that they're going to be judged.
Okay.
And then there's also the third type is other oriented. I don't work with those people as much, but they tend to hold other people to unrealistic standards of perfection. So they tend to be critical and judgmental. And I think we all have an example of those people in our lives.
Yeah, we do. All of us do. Um, it's the old saying, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. But we won't go there. Uh, I do have a story that I'll share real quick, and I shared with you offline before we got started. I had friends that I grew up with, a family that I grew up in, where I grew up in Golden, Colorado. And the one brother, these two brothers are some of the smartest guys I've ever run into, and today still that way. Had been in the supplement business, and the one brother started the company, and the other one joined him. And they're well known, but I don't have permission to talk about them identifying exactly. But they're great guys, and I still talked with one of them today. And the one brother started a new supplement nutrition company, amazingly successful, one of the biggest successes in the world. Then the other brother had, after they sold the company, he spun off and was working on a nutrition shake. And the guy was one of the smartest things, a rocket scientist. I mean, like 45, 46, 47 iterations of his formulations. Built the best tasting meal replacement shake you'd ever have. I mean, it was like drinking an ice cream shake. And he'd always want to market it. And he had engaged with me to help him market this and get it off the ground. And it was the most frustrating thing in the world because he was such a perfectionist. And everything we would try to write and put out there for marketing materials, edit and edit and edit and edit. And I would finally just get to him and say, hey, you got to take some action here. Action over perfection. And fast forward, it didn't make it. His product didn't make it. And it's a crying shame because it's absolutely the best one in the world. I can tell you that. And because my family's been around sports and that kind of stuff and all kinds of supplements, and no question his product was the best, but he was such a perfectionist, and because he's such a genius of a person, it was just kind of hard to get out of his own way. So is that kind of like a similar story that you see on a regular basis with your coaching clients?
Absolutely. And I would say it's interesting because what really stands out for me with your story is like the potential that he had.
Oh,
And,
amazing potential.
but I think sometimes that potential can cause a lot of pressure for the person who has the potential, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, the standard is so high for where I need to be. Everyone's expecting this amazing thing out of me because I am so smart. I am a genius. Then they internalize that and start to create these thought patterns that really aren't serving them. And they're just scared to put out anything that's not going to be absolutely perfect. And that's where it can be really helpful to have somebody else come in and sort of like show somebody their blind spots and say, hey, it looks like you're stalling here. Like, what are you really afraid of in that situation? Are you afraid that one person's going to give you a bad review and the whole thing is going to go under? How realistic is that? Are you worried that, you have this idea of how big you want something to be and it's not going to grow as fast as you want it to be growing, therefore you're a failure as a person? Like, I would be so curious to start unpacking that and seeing sort of like what his vision was for the end goal, and then what the milestones were as he was building that company and building that product, and what he saw as shortcomings. Because I find that often that self-critical piece can be leveraged really well into beautiful evaluation. Like, if we can separate out the person's value and the processes and the systems and the implementation, and have them use those sort of like critical eye pieces and their ability to really like dive into something and look at the details, and shift it away from them as a person and put it into like the systems and processes that they're building, it's magic. But it's just, you got to get it outside of your head, and you need to sort of expand that. And like you're saying, work on progress, not perfection. And don't be afraid of the progress, right?
Yeah, don't be afraid of the progress. He demonstrated some of those. Again, he's not the only example in my life, but it's the one that I just look to because unlimited potential, just unlimited potential, very best at what it was. But he was the type of guy, it would take him hours to write a blog. And he would look over every single word and laminate and think. But when it was done, oh my goodness, it was just very sharp, insightful, just, mind numbing brilliance. It was just, I mean, that sounds, but he literally would just get stuck on that. And I always appreciated every bit of his work, but it was just that type of behavior. So knowing that he was one of the smartest guys, and still is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, does perfectionism have a correlation or relationship to intelligence?
I'm not sure on that one. Like, I've seen more of the research on there's a correlation between anxiety and depression, perfectionism, but I'm not sure if there is a correlation between like IQ. I'm not sure, Rex.
Okay, so now I'm going to take this down another path because it's just a human observation.
Yeah.
With perfectionism, does it have relationships to OCD behaviors?
I would say like there is a tendency, once you're in a place where you're feeling like you can't control things, to go into those spaces of double checking, list making, worrying, like all those sort of repetitive double checking, checking in behaviors that you would see like in an OCD. I'm not sure if there is a scientific correlation between the two. That's something that I would definitely want to check into before I spoke to.
Well, I'm going to have to research that one out a little bit, because another little funny story. The very first company I ever started, when I was 17, and I started a paint contracting company, and I'm shortening the story by miles, right out of high school. So before I went off to college, I started a paint contracting company. And I painted for a long, long time. It was extra side income. It was good, get me through college income, all this kind of good stuff. So anyway, I painted a house for a lady, and she was such a perfectionist that I got to a point where I almost just wanted to give her some money and send her to go shopping or whatever, because she was just, it was incredible. I mean, I loathed finishing that project because after a while, I was like, I don't think you can make it any better than this. And I was a very seasoned and very skilled painter. I mean, I was almost an artisan for someone who painted exterior homes mostly. But that level of perfectionism was there. And she was very nice. She wasn't like imposing it on me, like being rude to me or anything like that third class of people you talk to.
Yes.
But I could just tell it was stressing her out so big as I was progressing through this job, because she's such a perfectionist.
Yeah, it was probably really hard for her too, to not have control.
Yeah. So is that the biggest issue that perfectionists deal with, is the lack of control?
I think it's more so the fear of failure. So that's the root cause.
Okay.
And what failure means about them as a person, and the way that they try and avoid that failure is by controlling everything. So that's where we see the procrastination, like you were saying with your friend in the blog post, right? Like just trying to get it absolutely perfect before anyone else sees that. I see that often too with my clients, sort of like planning out a launch or something like that. We're spending 99% of our time in the planning phase instead of taking action. And so it really sort of all comes back to that fear of failure. That's what really sparks perfectionism.
Okay, fear of failure.
Mhm.
I've spent most of my career and still am in that space in technology. A lot of software, online, internet, traffic consulting. And there's a phrase that we've always used in the tech industry is fail fast.
Mm.
Because if you're going to fail fast, right? Get it
Yeah.
done. Pick up the pieces and do the next one. Would a slogan like fail fast just like totally paralyze or freak out somebody that has the perfection issue, I guess?
Definitely, because like failure is not seen as an option. Like failure is seen as the absolute worst case scenario for perfectionists. So what I usually say to my clients is we're learning or we're winning.
Well, generally, success is being willing to fail at something every day. I mean, fail
Yeah.
over and over and over, because that's just the way you do it. I could tell 100 colloquialisms on that. So when 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 you talk to somebody that becomes your client that you're coaching and work with them, all right, so we know these bad behaviors, or maybe it's just behaviors that people want to change. Maybe bad's the wrong word. What is it that you start to do to help break some of these things that they're grasping onto, this fear of failure, this over? And because one of the problems I would think most of the time is there's so much in life we have no control over. I mean,
100.
I can't even imagine living in that concept. I am nowhere near a perfectionist. You can ask anybody in my life. I'm action over perfection any day of the week. So how do you start to break some of these cycles for these people?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I find that the first thing that we do is we really start to dive into how they say they're going to spend their time versus how they actually end up spending their time.
Okay.
So somebody will be like, oh, I need to write a blog post. I'm guessing that's going to take me an hour. 3 hours later, they're still on Pinterest researching the perfect idea. So we usually spend like the first week. So I work with people over a 12-week program. We usually spend that first week identifying like what they think their schedule is going to look like, identifying how long things are going to take, all that kind of stuff. Then they go through it and I have them keep track of what they waste a lot of time on, what they spend more time than they thought they would doing, what they're avoiding altogether, because that happens a whole lot. When push comes to shove, they're just like, nope, I'm not going to do that today. Move on to something else. It's always super interesting to see what they do instead also. And then we just sort of have a realistic chat about that behavior. Because I find with anybody, it needs to be individual and it needs to be the coach like holding up a mirror and being like, okay, this is what you just did. What do you think about
Right.
that behavior? What do you think that's saying? Instead of me talking about like theoretically, you could be self-critical. Theoretically, you could procrastinate. I want to see the actual data. I want to see what that looks like for them in their real life. So then we can start pulling that apart and working on things as we go through.
I smile and chuckle because I'm sitting here thinking, isn't that kind of asking the drunk to analyze the drunk? Because if you're a perfectionist and you're hard on yourself, how are you going to give yourself an objective measurement of how you're spending your time?
It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. And I think that one of the really good things about perfectionists is they are self-critical. So we can use that self-criticism and reframe it into evaluation. And I like to take sort of the judgment out of that. So I ask what went well, what did you learn, what would you do differently? So we're not making it about them as a person. We're making more about like the actions that they took or didn't take, what they
Right.
learned along the way, and then spinning that forward.
I guess what I was thinking, on the whole thing is, okay, if you were to ask me, okay, well, how did you do spending your day today? And if I'm a perfectionist, I might just crush myself in criticism because I'm going to overanalyze how I spent my time today.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's why we limit our sessions to an hour, and I'm there to pull them back from all that crazy. Because I agree, it could be a dumpster fire, right? Like if we just sort of let it go on its own. So you really do need somebody to sort of walk you through that if you're a perfectionist and help you see your blind spots. Because I find too perfectionists are really good at justifying
Oh,
their
sure.
their inactions, right? There's a reason for everything. And so just pulling that apart and looking at like the layers and seeing what's underneath there. What were we afraid of? Like, what were we avoiding and going from there?
Well, there's an old technique that they call the Benjamin Franklin. well, it's a variation of Benjamin Franklin. You take and write down the things that will make you money, okay, and put them in one column. That the things in your job, if I'm a salesperson, the things in my job that I'm going to make that are going to make me money. Then on the other column, you put the things down that you like to do. Well, that like to do list is usually the one where people spend all their time. It isn't the things that are going to do to make them money. And I have to live by that myself. Those in my life would remember that because I'm just not a perfectionist. So I guess it might be an interesting exercise when you're sitting down with someone to help them go through this self-analysis. If they truly are the perfectionist that they're paying you to help break some of those cycles, they might be way too hard on themselves on where they're spending their time and efforts. Now, I'm sure you probably don't, like you said, you don't make it personal, but interesting. I bet that's an interesting exercise to help them get through that at first.
It is. And where we do make it personal is we look at the thoughts that they're having when they decide to not do what they said they were going to do. So,
Okay.
like, what is the thought that's going on in your brain that says, no, I'm not going to actually go live on Instagram today because my hair is not perfect. I don't like my shirt. Like, what is that thought that you're having? Like, I'm not good enough. I don't have what I need. How does that make you feel? Like, what's the emotion? And then
Right.
how do you react when you're feeling that way? And I do help them practice, like, what could you think instead? What's another thought that you could have that still feels true? Because I don't think we should stand in front of, the mirror 1970s style and say a bunch of positive affirmations. Like, I don't believe in saying things you don't believe. But actually finding something that you do think, like, I could really help somebody if I went live today. And then coming from that place, instead of always being in that place of like super self-critical, really harsh judgment and just all that negative energy.
Interesting. We've seen some behavioral change outcomes because of the pandemic. Okay.
Mm.
I don't ever get into the politics of it, but over the last year, look at us here today. Now, I think this is a blessing to be able to do a podcast interview via Zoom, right? Because I can talk to anybody in the world and have all over 6 different continents. But the question is, one more point on that. Let me expand. We've gotten to the point because of pandemics that people are used to having not a whole lot of perfection in our media and then the things we watch. So you think early on when everything was really shut down, all of our news broadcasts came out of just like this. The broadcaster, the television talent was sitting in their basement, and they have pictures on the wall like this, and they've got flowers in the background and, paintings and stuff. But you know what? The world's gotten used to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you turn on YouTube or any of these places, you don't see a whole lot of stuff now. Even some of the biggest podcasters and political pontificating people and stuff, man, they're doing it anywhere and everywhere because it's really not about the perfection of the production anymore. Would that kind of behavior just drive a perfectionist crazy?
I think that's such a good question, Rex. And I think it definitely depends on the person. But I think for those self-oriented perfectionists, and that's the majority of my clientele. So those are the people that hold themselves in a high regard. What other people are doing is not really relevant.
Right.
The standards for the whole world could change. They still want to be putting forward a perfect product. And I saw that a lot when lockdown happened because, if you're suddenly working at home, you might not be as productive as you were like in the office. And that was really hard for a lot of perfectionists to oversee and like overcome. And also any sort of like uncertain circumstances are really challenging for perfectionists because they like to have that control, to know exactly what's coming. So I think it's almost been like a bit of a trigger for perfectionists with COVID and everything that's been happening because they are still having the same standards for themselves while everything else in the world's changing.
Yeah. So, interesting enough with this type of thing, that when your clients that you bring in with the perfectionism, you say you run them through or your program is 12 weeks long. Is there some like self-assessment milestones along the way to make sure that they're keeping themselves on track?
Well, it's my job to keep them on track. So I definitely like work with them to do that. It depends on what the goal is that they're coming to me with, or if they don't have a goal, what we create together.
Okay.
And we'll create milestones. Like I'll often do that for them. for, by this point, we probably want to be doing these type of things. Sometimes what I'll do is create like an epic fails list with them. So
Mhm.
these are things that they know that they cannot do, like not humanly possible to get it done, but we're just going to try. So it's a good mind hack because they know it's impossible. They can't be perfect at this. It's not even on the table that they can do it perfectly. So we're just going to like fail forward, right? Do our learning, progress, not perfection, and work that way. So often we set about 25 of those per quarter. That's something I do as well as an individual. And I find it's a really fun way to sort of trick my brain
Mhm.
into trying without having the same pressure that I would usually experience.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I should even tell this story. I probably won't. We'll just leave that one there. Because I had some people I used to work with that were just like perfectionists about how clean their desks were and stuff. So when they'd leave, we would mess with their desks and things like that just to cause them stress. So maybe that's not the type of perfectionism we're talking about today. So are the people who come to see you and want to fix this, are they fairly self-aware of the intensity of their perfectionism?
That's a good question. It exists on a continuum. Like I find it really, for a lot of people, will show up in their work, but not necessarily as much in their personal lives. So I see a lot of those sort of entrepreneurs that are finding, now that I'm my own boss, I could work 18 hours a day,
Sure.
right? Like that off switch. So I deal with that a lot because those people tend to be extremely stressed. So
Mhm.
creating that work-life balance. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any cases of people that you've been able just to help them with that big aha moment?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my ultimate wish for perfectionists is that we have that aha moment every time we week or every week that we meet. But one of my clients that I'm working with right now, she's got a successful six-figure business. She's a photographer down in Nashville, and she's built her business. It's amazing, it's thriving, but she was really struggling with that stress, and she was really struggling with, okay, the goal of being my own boss was to create like freedom in my life so I can do what I want.
Hmm.
And yet I'm feeling like my job is just constraining me. So one of the goals that we set for her was to take 40, like 40 Fridays off this year.
Nice.
So no work. She just takes it as like a personal development day, or she does like fun stuff, go to the lake, go on her boat, that kind of thing. And so just like working with her to get what she needs to do done before that, so she can actually have that time off, rest and recharge. And a couple of shifts that like she's realized is B minus work
Hmm.
to get that Friday off is worth it for her. Right. So coming out of that A plus mentality and going like B minus work is still really going to serve my audience. It's going to be an amazing product, significantly better than say the average person would produce. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for them. And I get this time off. So just sort of working with people in that way.
So your coaching business today, it's mostly one-on-one or exclusively one-on-one, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to do that in a remote like Zoom or those types of things, or are you mostly all in person?
No, I've actually always done all my coaching remotely.
Nice.
Yeah, so I work with people all over the world. I have lots of American clients who I love. And I find it's great because people can pop in from wherever they are, you know what I mean, whatever they're dealing with, and I can just sort of work with them. I do it over Zoom so I can see them, they can see me.
Yep.
I can share my screen if there's resources, that type of thing. It works really well.
It's a different world, and I actually believe it's kind of exciting. Every time we have these catastrophic struggles or issues, new things evolve, and I think it's great because now I've been in tech for 35 plus years. We've been working remote since notebooks came out, since the internet hit. I had a mentor that said, "I'll buy you a notebook anytime you want because I know you're going to work all the time," which is true. I mean, we've gotten to that type of culture. So I think there's some good that's come out of that. I really do. There's some bad that we've seen, some things and changes, but all
Yeah.
kinds of industries today are deciding, wow, we can work remotely. I mean,
I,
we can, and it's exciting because it changes lifestyles for us. So, how do people get in touch with you if they're interested in becoming, I guess, what uh, previous perfection addicts?
I call myself a recovering perfectionist.
You're a recovering perfectionist.
It's still there, right? And I do take like a positive approach to perfectionism. I'm not suggesting it's a good thing because, like I said, it has been linked to like anxiety and depression. But I just think like those headlines, like, oh, we need to overcome perfectionism and we need to like beat procrastination. It's just adding more frustration and guilt and like resistance into an already intense situation. So I like to work with people with what they already are, like their personalities, how they are as humans, and then just like leverage those different little quirks and little intensities because I really do think that they can work for you and it can create something amazing.
Okay, that's great. So share your website for us.
Yeah, so my website's justinecochrane.com. So JustineCochrane.com.
Fantastic. That and are you still booking clients at this point in time?
I am full for March, but I am looking at April because I kind of do it quarters at a time. So
Okay.
looking into the second quarter.
Well, for those who might listen to this in the future, we're recording this at the end of February, so of 21. So don't ever give up. Get in touch with her because this will be heard and listened to many times in the future at different times and dates. All right, so here's the $64 million question. It used to be $64,000 question, but 64,000, who cares about that? So the $64 million question I ask almost every one of my guests is, okay, in this day and age, we all run around with this crazy concept called a bucket list. Oh, these things I want to do, right? I'm going to go do these things. All right. Well, there's an opposite list that I don't think everybody thinks about because I'm going to leave you with a thought that's going to burn in your mind. There's an opposite list of things you never want to do, and it's called a list, but it rhymes with bucket and starts with an F, right? But I'm not saying that, all right? Okay. So on that list, one of the items, just off the cuff, what's something you'd never want to do? And it's probably going to tell us, myself and our listeners, something about you. What's something you're never going to do?
What is something I'm never going to do? This is hard for me as a life coach because I'm very much like never say never, right?
Well, okay, put that on the shelf. Just be a human being for a minute. No coach. What is something you're never going to do? Like, I'll give you an example.
I'm never going to join Facebook.
Never going to join Facebook.
Can I say that? I never have, and I never will.
All right. That's good enough. That tells us something about you. See, one of mine was I'm never going back to Mexico City. Been there once. Didn't have the best time. No need to go back. Saw it. So, yeah. Well, you know what, Justine, you're the first person I've heard that will admit that. Never going to join Facebook. I know a lot of people who are trying to get away from that, but that's a whole different discussion. Well, thanks for coming on today. It's been enjoyable. Glad to have you as a guest. And I will have you back because I want to kind of follow up on how things are going. And I think it's a fascinating service that you provide because everybody knows a perfectionist in their life. And it could be any one of those three. It really could. And I think you can help people. You know, in life, there's a saying that it's not what happens to us, it's how we respond. Okay. And I think you have techniques and skills to teach people how to respond or better respond to how life happens to us because it's really difficult. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good. We'll have you back in the future. So for everyone listening in, this is the Rex Andrews Show. And until next time, I just have three things to say. Be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.